2020 has been one of those strange years. We've had tons of great games, but we've also had a bit of a lockdown that's forced us to play our games a little bit differently. One of our great plans for our annual event was an award show, which of course hasn't come to pass. However, there are some great games that have been out there that we want to talk about. We want to tell you our little mini award ceremony for those that we want to offer, and we desperately want to tell you what Chris's mum's favourite game is. So you've got that to look forward to.
So all of the games that you're going to hear about today are games that have come to our attention since the last show in 2019. So these might not all be new games, but they're all games that have just come to our attention, and it's just worth stating that that's the parameters that we're working within. So Charlie, would you like to start with your first game?
Fabulous,
award?
I will, and I'll go in with the controversy straight away. Is the most argument-inducing game, because I feel like this is a shot at redemption for what became one of my favourite games, but our certain editor did not like, which is Trails of Tucana.
Do you want to say what Trails of Tucana is?
I shall. It is a roll and write, or a flip and write. So you get your cards, you flip those over, and those dictate the path that you take between villages or collecting different artefacts. It's a nice, simple, fun game, and especially given COVID-19, where we've had to be doing things over video chat quite often, it's a game that translates really well, and there's so much fun to be had with it. Yeah. However,
well, I obviously can't argue with that part, because I only played it in a room full of actual people, and all of those people looked at me and said, "Chris, what is this game, and why am I playing it?" And it was a perfectly fine roll and write, but it just left everyone feeling like they didn't have a map at the end of the game, which is part of the game. Is you're drawing these journeys for your characters through the various different things on the island to collect points. And that sounds simple and fun, but everyone in the room with me when I played it just simply said, "I don't know why I'm doing this." So that's my answer to that. But this is the argument we've been having.
Exactly. It's come up as the one that we've disagreed on perhaps the most, and the example of one that we do disagree on is this another Trails of Tucana. Yeah. But as its redemption, I think it's great.
Okay, shall we do another one?
Yes.
Okay, so easy one for me here, and unsurprising to anyone who has been listening to the podcast or listened to me talk about RPGs at any point in the history of my time at the magazine. And it's the best way to die in an RPG award goes to Morkborg. That's the Swedish art punk horror metal RPG game, which just focuses on brutality and swift deaths and a lot of good fun on the way there. So that's the best way to die in an RPG.
So I'll go in next. You've brought your mum into the conversation, which we'll talk about at the end. But best game to pitch to your gran.
Go on then.
I think, or to play with your gran maybe, pitch and play with. And I think it's the one behind you. I think it's Pokemon Battle Academy. Because I genuinely think that anyone can learn that game through Pokemon Battle Academy. And then you're in an entire world of Pokemon trading card games. Hark back to the days when you were a child and your gran would hand you £2 and you'd go down to the shop and you'd pick up some sweets. Now, she hands you £2, maybe you save it a little bit because you'll need a little bit more than that. You head down for some trading cards. Great opportunity to play with your nan at any time. I think she'd love it.
I think there's a good argument to be made here that there are games that should be there should be sort of shout outs for games that make the learning experience for them very, very simple. Games like with the starter decks in the Pokemon Battle Academy are very good at that. And then other games that maybe just another example of this is a huge Kickstarter game called Enchanters. That had probably one of the best rule sheets I've ever seen, because it simply on the quick start, it just says, if you don't understand a rule, ignore it. And I think that's a really good way to start playing a game, because that's really what you have to do anyway. And getting really worried about not doing the right thing at any point is something that can really suck the fun out of these games. So well done, Pokemon Battle Academy, for...
I think they should put it on their box, that's all I'm saying.
Good for your nan.
Good for your nan. Next up, we'll talk about
My next nomination is for the game that made me feel young again. And by young again, I mean maybe like 10 years ago, so sort of middle young. And that game is Caravan by Rio Grande. Now, Caravan is a it looks archaic. It looks like a game from a different time, and that's maybe why it made me feel like that. But it's a game about delivering goods with a row of camels to different cities across the board. And that sounds pretty simple and straightforward, and that's because it is. It's just like a really good gateway game in the spirit of Carcassonne or Catan or any of those like lightweight, elegant systems that you can then that let you enjoy the game on a pure loop of just the same thing over and over again. And that's you don't experience that much anymore. You experience a lot of games that have either very simple mechanics because they're aiming for a younger market or maybe a party market, and on the other hand, you have the much more complex experiences, both of which are good. But there's very few pitching for that perfect point in the gateway segment there. So that's Caravan.
Cool. Next up, I'll talk about the weirdest / best accessory to come in a board game. I think you had potentially a nomination for this, but as I'm the one talking, I'm going to steal the winner, which is the hat from Barking Kittens. Now, Barking Kittens is an expansion to Exploding Kittens, and as usual, it's all a little bit bonkers, but in the best way. And within the box, they offer you a hat, which is the Tower of Power, which sits on your head with little cat designs and little cat paws?
Probably paws.
Out to the side as well. You look absolutely ridiculous. It had us in complete stitches, and I just loved it.
So my tentative suggestion is that we should put Superfly in there, which I haven't played yet, but the component that they have in the box, and therefore the fun you have in opening it, is a plastic fly swatter with sort of a bubble containing a dice, and you roll your dice by slapping the fly swatter down. And I don't know why we roll dice in a normal way now.
I'm now trying to incorporate it into my D&D.
Absolutely. Exactly. Why not do it? They need a D20 fly swatter.
Yes.
That's what they need, and then that will get us a long way there to.
I'll pitch it to ELO, see what they say.
Okay, so yes, my absolute favourite best competitive action game would be Wormlord. I've talked about this a lot today already, but Wormlord is the equivalent of a rugby scrum, if that's all that rugby was. It's just a war of attrition, but it's you untying knots that other people create while they're trying to untie knots that you've created in an attempt to advance your worms towards the goal of the castle. Other notable mentions, though, are the really excellent and probably underrated Modiphius game, Kung Fu Panda, which is an action dice game in the same way as Escape the Cursed Temple, and involves like a nice modular board, lots of different scenarios, and it really made my family, the group of people I played with, work up a sweat towards doing sort of their best impression of sort of a kung flu blob that ran through these temples and through these different scenarios. So that's yes, best competitive action game, Wormlord.
From a slightly more serious version to a slightly less serious version, I would argue for the Captain Jack Sparrow Award, which I have to say my favourite pirate game this year fell under Corsairs of Valeria, which I think is a very underrated but very good pirate racing game. However,
yeah, well, I do like that, and the rule of all pirate games is that they have to be a race game in some way. There's I don't know why. They're in a rush. Exactly, they're always in a rush. It doesn't matter what they're doing overall. There's never seems to be much planning in it. They're always just trying to get somewhere in a hurry. So my favourite pirate game, or the game that most fulfills the piratey needs of racing across a map, is a game called Extraordinary Adventures Pirates. And this is a lovely, beautifully produced game, which has you racing across the Caribbean using a smart deck building mechanic. At the very start, when you leave port, your deck is filled with landlubbers who are not very useful to you. And as you build up, you buy cards from a market, you draw cards from separate ports that you call to on the way, and all the while you're also popping in at ports to pick up certain resources required to exchange them for treasures at the end of the game. Now, that all sounds pretty simple, except the game has 3 different tracks that you're racing along, so you have to decide how you're going to distribute that hand you have each turn. And while you might think, I'll just race along one, I'll leave them all behind, there's really the sense of FOMO of losing out on the race on the other 2 tracks. It's palatable. And so the battle you're having in the game is between yourself, the cards, and what's on the table. And it's an absolute joy and a very nice, gentle Sunday afternoon game. So my next game, if I can dive straight in here, is the best family-ish game with horror elements. And that game, for me, is a game called Horrified, which is based on the Universal Pictures monsters. Now, so this, you've got a Frankenstein, you've got a Dracula, and you're just wandering around a town trying to collect things so that you can lift the curse on each of the monsters, set everyone free, and hopefully not get eaten. However, things can get a bit dicey, and the monsters will always be chasing you in one way or another, or trying to eat other villagers, and you've got to keep people safe. So that's my best family-ish game with horror elements. My other recommendation for that is Zombie Kids Evolution.
I did wonder how anyone else could be a runner-up for that quite specific.
Yes.
The second you said it, I know what game we're going for there. So yeah. Zombie Kids fits into that as well. So
it does.
Okay. I take back my.
Yeah. So Zombie Kids is a lovely game about protecting your school from zombies and rolling dice and making sure that the zombies don't catch up with you. And locking, or in fact it's about locking zombies out of the school. But it's a legacy game, so kids get to be able to open every time the kids complete part of the adventure, they get to open an envelope, stick down a sticker, and it gives them new powers and new rules and new characters sometimes. And it's all super exciting. So it's an interesting introduction to legacy games for kids.
And there's a Zombie Teens coming out this year as well.
And there's a Zombie Teens coming out.
Maybe they'll feature in next year's horror-ish games for kids.
No, family-ish games with horror elements.
Yes. It'd be perfect for that next year. We'll have to consider it. Next up is my best reason to go to a library but not go to a library. And I mean, if you couldn't guess it from that title, I don't think you will guess it anyway. However, I played Dig Deeper, which I think is the perfect response to that title, because as all award ceremonies should consider going to the library, but only virtually going to the library, is I thought Dig Deeper was incredibly clever with how it went from the detective elements that we sort of are quite familiar with in terms of here is your case, here is the things you'll need to investigate, your choice of investigation depends on what cards you pick or what you choose to do with your time and not get too stressed. And then they said they were doing a signature series set sort of back 50, 60 years ago, and a whole part of detective is being able to use the internet. So how on earth do you use the internet when you're looking at sort of a mob hit in the 50s, or I can't remember the exact timeline, but we'll say 50s. Answer, you go to the library. Hadn't thought of this, takes longer, which I also quite like. If you pop to the library to research why something is as it is, or research a person, you now have to do so with more time than you did before, but you have to actually consider the internet is not available and there are libraries that you should be attending.
This is all part of the detective series, isn't it?
Yes, Portal Games, it's a lovely one. Dig Deeper is Rob Davenau?
That's right. I think
Rob Davenau.
So my a pet pleasure of mine in gaming is gardening games. It's just it's not what I expected when I started playing as many games as I thought. I thought there'd be more war. I thought there'd be more aliens. I thought there'd be more shooting things generally. You know, these are the things you think of when you think of sort of classic board games. You know, and maybe buying houses and things. But no, there's a million gardening games, and then we've had loads this year. So I'll do my runners-up first, actually. So I recommend Queens, which is Bruno Cathala. That's a game about placing your hives on your personal plot of land by manipulating the bees and tokens in the centre of the board. Additionally, I'd recommend Succulent, which is a Renegade Games game, which is all about growing succulents in a kind of like in a courtyard. That's got a really elegant token based market system for scoring points that really teaches you how you need to play the game as you go through it. So it's a really smart way to do that. My Abbey, again, that's Michael Kiesling. That is a Japanese garden-style gardening game in which you layer up, again, your sort of tetromino-style tiles, hoping to score points based on the rows they're in. So it's kind of the spreadsheet of the gardening game world. And that's better than it sounds. And Village Green by Piers Sylvester is an excellent representation of the bubbling undercurrent of seething resentment between local villages over the quality of whose village green is better or not. And it's just a really nice contemplative game. But my favourite gardening game is Ishtar, which is about planting beautiful things in the desert, collecting gems, and looking to collect the best trees and things like that. So it's all of these games they express something very simple. They give it in the sense of they are all about collecting nice things. You create nice scenes in front of you, and there's just a sense of after you finish the game, you look down at what you've got in front of you, and things are nicer than they were when you started, and that's just a nice thing to have in a game. So that's Ishtar for my best gardening game of the year.
I think perhaps my final award,
Yeah.
and one of the most argued about, if we take out the fact that Trails to Tucana was obviously the most argued about, this was the most disputed award winning, which is the ones with the best dry erase markers.
Yes.
Genuine discussion we had to have over this, because I battled for Sonora, which is a mini roll and write. There are 4 roll and writes within one game of a roll and write, so you have to get your head in the right space for it. But every player gets their dry erase player scoreboards, and they fill those in as they go, and you get your lovely little marker pens with your little erasers on the top. Sounds wonderful. However,
well, I personally feel like that David Tursi's very recent Roman roll, which you've not had the chance to play, so I think they are actually the best dry erasers in any of the roll and write spaces, because they're slightly angled and very high quality. But I think what we're really highlighting here is that roll and write is sort of coming of an age as a genre.
It's been a good year to be a fan of a roll and write.
Absolutely.
Because there's just been more and more that's come out, and more that's been enjoyable.
Yeah, and the quality of the components sort of speaks to that in many ways. You know, I think traditionally you think of a roll and write as being the cheapest possible thing to produce. Really, it's just a pad of paper and a couple of pencils, and off you go. And now people are putting a lot of effort into it, a lot of thought into the kind of roll and writes they're creating. So yeah, that's
it's a great result, which is why I would argue that Sonora wins.
It's probably the most interesting, because it's technically a flick and write.
Yes, think Tiddlywinks, but better, and with a board and with 4 roll and writes. It's the roll and write game for roll and write fans, with a little bit of dexterity as well, just to change things up.
Yeah. Whereas David Tursi's game is more of a game for people who want to play a heavier Euro, but would quite like to draw some things on a board at the same time. So that's more or less what that is. Yeah. So I'll give you my final award, which is best use of a box as a board, which is a a trend we've seen like with a few games, and one of my favourites, and not the winner, I'm afraid, is Mechania, which is a game about creating robots that are going to tidy up after you. So creating those tiny little Roombas, but it comes the entire game comes in the box, perfectly set up. You only have to move a couple of things, and the tracks are all in the box, all the pieces are in the box, everything's done. You just remove the lid, and you're pretty much ready to play the game, except for moving a couple of player boards. I think that's one of the most inventive uses of that box space. You know, if you've ever frequented a Board Game Geek forum where they've complained about having to chop apart their inserts and things like that for the boxes to make all the components fit, this is not a game you're worrying about that in, because it's all there for you. But I think the winner of this is the Aiello game Flying Goblin, which is a game about, it's a worker placement game, but you're placing the workers by flicking them on a tiny catapult. And they go flying into, your workers, your goblins, go flying into a castle, and you then get the points based on where they land. And it's just good fun, tactile, and everything is in the box ready to go, except for the things you're going to throw into it later. So in many ways also, if you're playing it right, you're probably tidying up as you go. So thank you for coming to our award ceremony.
And congratulations, of course, to our winners, who are well deserved of each and every title.
Yep. Hopefully we'll do something bigger, more exciting, and better next year, slightly more validated by having a panel of judges rather than just